from New England. I'm a 774.
Yep, me
What
too.
what part of
Cape Cod.
Cape Cod? Cool.
Yeah,
I'm from Marlboro.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well,
Very
thanks
cool.
for stopping by.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Welcome, y'all. If you could find a seat, grab your beer, your pizza, your whatever, and make yourselves comfortable. We'll get rolling. My DJ voice. I like it. Uh-oh, polar bears. Well, welcome to the second edition of VR Beyond Gaming. We're your hosts for the evening. My name is Sean McMains. I'm one of the technology directors here at Mutual Mobile, and I'm helping organizing the VR efforts.
And I'm Trisha Katz. I am a web engineer here at Meetup Mobile and also helping organize.
If you find a seat, grab your beer, your pizza, your whatever. How am I doing that?
That's the magic.
So we want to first talk about a couple of news items. Some recent interesting things that have come up is the Oculus Touch is being released. These are Oculus's answer to the Vive controllers. We were fortunate enough to get a couple of dev units, so Frank is holding those back there. If you want to have a chance to see them up close and personal, you can do so days before the general public gets a hold of them. Another thing that came out recently is talk about this. We haven't actually seen the hardware yet, but there's something called Modal VR. This is notable because Nolan Bushnell is involved in it. You may recognize his name because he was the founder of Atari way back in the day. Now, this is billed as an enterprise VR system, and its sort of unique characteristic is that it is scaled to go up to like football field sizes, and it's set up for easy deployment. So their demo video shows a dude with a backpack showing up at the side of a football field, sets up a couple of posts around the edges, and then they're doing this 100-yard virtual reality game across this chasm between buildings. It's pretty wild. I was a little surprised that as they're billing this as an enterprise solution that they're using a game to demo it, but it's an effective demo. It looks really neat. So this will be one to keep your eyes on as well. And did you have anything you wanted to throw in on anything recently?
Actually, I did want to introduce Kyle over here in the corner. Kevin. I'm sorry, Kevin. Over here in the corner. He actually, do you want to come up here and just give a quick introduction to what you've got over there so people can check it out afterwards?
Awesome.
Sorry, Kevin.
Oh, it's fine. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Olson. I am from the Houston VR Meetup group. Found out about this, and I had to come down. But currently, some of us in the VR Meetup group in Houston have actually come together, and we are starting a conference in Houston specifically for VR Beyond Gaming. We're calling it the Industrial and Business Applications of VR and AR. It's the Immersive Technology Conference. It's going to be at U of H on November 14th through the 16th. I've got some flyers up here and some cards, so if anyone is interested in coming out attending, we have tons and tons of speakers. We have we have a guy from Microsoft. We have a guy from NASA. A couple of architecture firms coming out. All kinds of stuff. We're trying to branch out into anything and everything we possibly can. But so if you want to know any more information about it, just come over and see me. I've got some flyers and some business cards.
Awesome. Yeah. That sounds fantastic. I want to make a field trip. All right, so this evening's presenter is Colin McGee. He comes to us from Compass Learning, where he's a product leader, is doing education technology, and is spearheading kind of their interest in virtual reality. He may be the entirety of their interest in virtual reality right now. He's got interest and dedication to both the educational aspect of VR, but is also interested in using it in therapeutic situations for kids who may have special needs and some other applications, which I imagine we'll be hearing a little bit more about as he speaks. So please welcome Colin McGee. All right, let's get you all plugged in.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Sean. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you, Sean, for the introduction. So the presentation that I'm about to share with you is one that I shared with a large education industry consortium a few months back. And my goal at the time was to evangelize virtual reality within the education community. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I started to really network within the local VR community here in Austin, and Sean was one of the people that I met about a month before the presentation. So it's really nice for me to kind of come full circle and be here, especially because I found Sean so helpful and so generous with his time and with his ideas as I was preparing, that it's great to be here now sharing back with the community that helped me bring this to the education community. And so the goals for this session today, we're going to walk through the education, like the value proposition for education within virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. We'll talk a little bit about like the landscape right now for immersive ed tech products, VR, AR, and MR, and some of their use cases. And then I'll talk a little bit about what some of the inhibitors that that I'm seeing right now for classroom and education adoption. But please feel free to ask questions and things along the way. I would love for this to be more of a dialogue than a straight presentation. And so, yeah. Before we jump in, a little bit about me. So as Sean mentioned, I run product management at Compass Learning. We are a provider of a digital curriculum for the classroom that is personalized to individual student needs, and we're in about 10% of US public schools. So virtual reality is not our bread and butter, but I see the education industry moving, or I see these technologies having like really strong use cases within education. So I'm trying to get virtual reality on our roadmap, and I'm also pursuing entrepreneurial ideas on my own because I see the merits for this. And so we'll talk a little bit through this presentation about why education companies are slow to really think about virtual reality and putting them on their roadmaps and what some of those inhibitors might be. But as I mentioned, I run product at Compass. Before that, I was a technology consultant at Accenture and at Sapient. And the picture on the left is a picture of my father and my grandfather, who were both expert woodworkers. And I share that with you because the values of craftsmanship, specifically taking pride in the things that you build, is really important to me. And so with anything that I do as a product manager, that's one of the values that I really try and emulate. And then my other passions, I'm now passionate about virtual reality, and as Sean mentioned, I'm specifically interested in the intersection of technology and cognitive development. So how VR and how these other technologies could be used for people with learning disabilities, autism, and other social and emotional use cases. Okay, so jumping in, there are some forecasts about the education industry and these technologies. Goldman Sachs a few months ago released a report where they're forecasting what the market adoption of these technologies might be in different timeframes. So by 2020, they're expecting that VR and AR content products will be roughly around a $300 million market within the K-20 education space, so public schools, then up through higher education institutions, and that it might be a $700 million industry by 2025. And so while these aren't specifically large numbers, to give you a sense of what the total digital supplemental space is in the K-12 education space right now, it's roughly like $6.5 billion. So this is K-20, these numbers, but if you think about what $700 million might mean in terms of the whole market in the future for education software, that's roughly 10% of where the market will be in 2025. So Goldman is conservatively estimating that these technologies are going to gain some adoption. And so what I want to do now is kind of walk through the kind of 4 different classifications in my mind of immersive technologies and what some of the educational use cases might be. I realize that this might be a little remedial for some people in the room that are like especially well versed in these technologies, but I want to share this kind of more broadly so everyone is working from the same set of language and that we can walk through what the use cases are for education. So the first is augmented reality, and the definition of augmented reality to me is the superimposing of graphics, of images and of text into the real world, where the media itself has very little interaction with the real world. And so this is an example of Google Translate. I'm not sure if anyone is using that application right now, but it does a great job of taking almost any text that you could see on a piece of paper or out in the real world and right away translating it to you to a different language. And so if you think about how to extrapolate this to the education space, augmented reality is really powerful in enhancing our understanding of the real world. Possibly in identifying people and identifying objects. And then within education, it can be particularly helpful in delivering instruction and delivering directions to someone. And so we're starting to see a lot of applications in like the medical education, where learning how to give surgery and stuff like that. You're seeing people with Google Glass. So augmented reality is largely around helping provide instructions and information to people. Mixed reality is, I'm sure, a topic a lot of people here are getting excited about. I saw some HoloLenses flying around earlier. But my definition of mixed reality is the blending of the digital and the real worlds to the extent that the digital objects can coexist with what's happening in the real world. And so what you have in augmented reality, there's very little interaction. You're more kind of labeling what you see out in through the viewer, but in mixed reality, these things are actually coexisting. And I think mixed reality might have some of the most exciting benefits in the education space. And as we'll get into some of these use cases, specifically around like investigative learning and then collaborative and social learning as well. And so mixed and augmented reality is kind of one set of experiences where the real world is part of the immersive experience. And then on the other side, virtual reality, and on the lower end of that, 360-degree videos. So moving into 360-degree video, this is an example of like a rig that people might use to film 360-degree videos, and we're starting to see these pop up in the education space as I guess the driver right now of bringing VR into education because of how cheaply 360-degree videos can be produced. So for virtual field trips and other types of low fidelity educational experiences, 360-degree video is really powerful. But for the reason that I think that 360-degree video can be especially powerful in education is that it's a really cheap way for us to capture and share memories. And so one of the things that I really like most about VR is how it can solicit like a deep emotional response for you because you're fully immersed in this world that when you put on the goggles. And so I have one quick video or a clip from a video that I want to share from a presentation from a guy named Chris Milk, who did a TED Talk called VR is the Ultimate Empathy Machine. Has anyone seen that video by any chance? Cool. Well, I'm just going to share this one clip where he talks about a series of videos that he produced for the United Nations in order to fundraise for the Syrian refugee crisis. And so let me just share that.
I am 12 years old. I am in the 5th grade. I am from Syria in the Dar'a province in Khil City. I have lived here in the Zaatari camp in Jordan for the last year and a half. I have a big family, 3 brothers. One is a baby. He cries a lot. I asked my father if I cried when I was a baby, and he says I did not. I think I was a stronger baby than my brother.
So, when you're inside of the headset, you're not seeing it like this. You're looking around through this world. You'll notice you see full 360 degrees in all directions. And when you're sitting there in her room watching her, you're not watching it through a television screen. You're not watching it through a window. You're sitting there with her. When you look down, you're sitting on the same ground that she's sitting on. And because of that, you feel her humanity in a deeper way. You empathize with her in a deeper way. And I think that we can change minds with this machine.
So that really resonated with me when I saw it, using virtual reality to solicit a deep emotional response. And basically what he's saying is that by transporting and putting you there next to the person in the room, that you can kind of not just understand and comprehend the struggles of the plight of one person, but you can really feel and empathize because you're so immersed in the experience. And when I think about that, like I think about like extrapolating to use cases where you could be teaching civil rights, but instead of reading a book about Malcolm X or about Martin Luther King, you could actually have someone like experience what it feels like to be discriminated against in a virtual reality application or through 360-degree video. And so finally, you know, the higher end of 360-degree video then is virtual reality, where you're fully immersed in like a computer-generated reality. And so you're fully immersed and you're fully present there. And the applications and the use cases within education is that you can transport people to places that were completely inaccessible, and you can help people deeply immerse in like a sensory experience. And so I shared this during the original presentation, this kind of like summative graph where kind of plotted where I see mixed, augmented, virtual, and 360-degree videos kind of lining up in terms of like how immersive they are and the extent that you can interact with things. So 360-degree videos, for example, not much interaction you can do. You can kind of look around to different vantage points, and you can play forward and back in time. But within virtual reality, you're getting that same level of immersion, but there's a lot more that you can do from an interaction standpoint. And then if you want to compare kind of augmented and mixed reality is providing you with a much higher level of interaction compared to augmented reality, but compared to VR and 360-degree videos, there's far less immersion because the real world is still there. Does this kind of help people think about like the 4 different type of technologies and how they kind of work with each other? Yeah.
Your point you just said brings to mind something that I dealt with, that is not necessarily a bad thing, that the interaction, because you still see the real world, so you're not immersed as much in it. Because I put it into context by doing 2 different projects, 2 different things. Once I was visiting real quick, I was visiting a friend and I was in the Vive, and I was on a castle wall, about 200 feet. And I mean, I was in his living room, beautiful carpet room. And I'm holding on, holy crap. I mean, I'm looking down 200 feet, right? My knees are buckling. But in HoloLens, I've been 500-800 feet in the air in Machu Picchu. But I can still see the real ground, so I'm still grounded in this, you know, this universe. But I'm still getting the experience. So, I mean, I can see pluses and minuses on both sides. That's
Sure.
all I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of these technologies have a place within education. You know, we're seeing right now a higher uptick in virtual reality and 360-degree videos, specifically because of how cheaply 360-degree videos can be filmed and turned into a virtual field trip. But I think as some of the mixed reality devices come online, specifically HoloLens and Magic Leap, we're going to start seeing a lot more exciting educational use cases be discovered. And so overarching, like what the value proposition is for these technologies in the education space, education traditionally has been about the transfer of knowledge from teacher to student. But as education is being rethought more recently, there's more of a notion of preparing students for the real world problems that they're going to encounter, knowing that the jobs that exist tomorrow that students are going to have don't even exist now. So we need to prepare students for critical thinking skills. And there's this notion of the constructivist theory of learning that says students learn best by building and sharing things and reflecting on what they built, not necessarily just to transferring of knowledge or specific skills from teacher to student. And so virtual reality kind of plays on this old adage that we remember 20% of what we hear and 30% of what we see, but 90% of what we experience. VR and AR allow us to experience things that are not currently possible. And some of the other kind of like supporting benefits of these technologies, the entire world and our imaginations now can become the classroom. So we're no longer kind of fixed to what is physically possible. We can transport people to Mars or transport people to different places. It can enrich our understanding of the real world. We talked about that a moment ago with augmented reality and mixed reality. But this third point, it's a safe and cost-effective way to have like different types of experiences. So field trips right now are limited to the proximity of where a school exists and the finances of a certain school district. And so virtual reality can actually provide all sorts of different field trip experiences to students that don't have that right now. But if you think about also on like the chemistry side of things with safe experiences, no longer are you kind of constrained to a chemistry kit with what's safe in the classroom. Now with augmented and mixed reality, we could bring in all sorts of combustible materials and other types of experiments that you can run because we're just dealing with virtual objects and not real explosives and things like that. Virtual reality can help and augmented foster social interactions. We saw this with Pokemon Go a few months ago that specifically students with autism and people were collaborating and connecting in ways that previously wasn't really possible. And then finally, these technologies, as I shared from that video a moment ago, can really help us develop really deep empathy for the content that we're experiencing. And then by being fully present in a virtual reality experience, there's a level of mindfulness and presence which is difficult to achieve, I think, outside of virtual reality. So there's not a lot of distractions when you're in one of these VR experiences. That is what you're doing. You're fully present in there, and that allows us to solicit a deep emotional response and to stay fully present in what we're experiencing. And so there's been a bunch of research done by two groups, Samsung and another one called Ignite. And so Samsung a few months ago had surveyed a few thousand teachers to see what their kind of like overall reception was towards these technologies. And they found that 85% of the teachers surveyed really had like a positive notion of what or belief in what merits virtual reality could provide in the classroom. This other company, Ignite, then kind of drilled this down a little bit further a few weeks ago and kind of looked at what educators saw as like the most specific benefits. And so you can see from this data that the biggest driver right now that people see in education is that it's just simply going to like excite students and it's going to encourage creativity. And that's a difficult proposition to be working on if you're trying to sell VR applications into a district, because they typically aren't buying things for the notion of exciting students. But this is what teachers are kind of seeing as like the reasons that they're most excited about these technologies. I think another thing that's a little interesting is that if you look at what subjects educators right now are currently thinking about virtual reality for in school, you notice here that science and history are the predominant subject areas that people are thinking about virtual reality. And I bring this up as interesting because the lion's share of spending in the digital supplemental market is in English and in math. And so 90% of digital supplemental sales are in those two categories, but the places that people are most excited about of like federal dollars spent on educational software programs are in English and math, and that's because of accountability and the Common Core standards, right? So school districts have this big problem right now of increasing the number of students that are, increasing the graduation rate of students in the middle school level and in the high school level. And students are tested mostly on math and their ELA skills. And so while education leaders are excited about the merits of virtual reality, the specific problem that they're trying to solve right now is increasing the achievement gap of what their students or how they're doing on exams. And so I think one of the challenges that these immersive technologies are going to have is finding a way to fit into the economics of a school district. And right now, education leaders are paying for improvement on tests at the end of the school year, not necessarily paying on expanding their science and history curriculum. Does that make sense? No. And so next I want to kind of transition us to some of the specific use cases and some of the companies that I think are exciting right now and some of the things that they're doing. So virtual field trips, that's kind of the most obvious way right now that virtual reality is finding itself in the classroom. So virtual field trips is transporting students to real-world places that were otherwise inaccessible due to travel or due to the fact that this moment in time has passed, etc. Virtual field trips have a really strong case right now in 360-degree video and virtual reality, less so in augmented and mixed reality because those are adding digital to the real world as we see it. But some of the companies, I think, doing the most exciting things right now, obviously Google is like the leader right now in virtual field trips. I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with Google Cardboard, the low-cost viewer. But beyond that, Google has an expedition program where they've created over 250 virtual field trips that are being used in the classroom right now. And on top of that, they have what's called their Pioneer program, where they're going around to different schools all over the country and all over the world, getting people to try Google Expeditions and the Google Cardboard combination. And so they have like the deepest penetration right now in the public school system for virtual reality. They claim that through their Expedition program, 1 million students have tried virtual reality in the United States alone. Another company I want to highlight is Immersive. It's interesting that you brought them up. Do you work for Immersive or no? Okay. So yeah, they're a company I've spoke to their founder a few times, and they are building out a bunch of virtual reality experiences. They have an app that you can use to go into the Apollo spaceship, and then this is one for Stonehenge. And so again, the kind of use case here is instead of reading about Stonehenge or reading about the pyramids, we're going to transport you and put you in Stonehenge so that you can feel the vastness and really feel why it is so significant that a bunch of rocks are stacked up somewhere in England. Like what is really so significant about that? You can read about it, but if you can really fully experience it, it's going to resonate with students at a far greater level. So that's virtual field trips. And to go back, that Samsung research that was done, 69% of teachers were really enthusiastic about using virtual reality to bring students on virtual field trips. Another item that I think is really exciting is the thought of virtual exploration. So that would be bringing people to places that were currently inaccessible right now. So bringing people to the bottom of the ocean or bringing them to imaginary places such as a virtual forest. And so one of the examples here is a company called Nearpod. So Nearpod is probably the closest company right now in the education technology space that is building VR applications and doing so in a way that's going to be viable in terms of selling in schools. So what they're trying to do is build a suite of VR content apps that can cover a grade span and cover multiple subject areas. And so this one, as you can see, is targeted for grades 3 to 6. They're aligning these to Common Core standards, and in terms of penetrating traditional educational institutions, one of the challenges really is having a breadth of content when you go in there. And so what Nearpod is doing is trying to come up with a breadth of content that they can bring into school districts, and so they're not just selling one-off applications, but selling this portfolio of educational content. Another company that I think is really interesting, Alchemy VR. So Alchemy is building, their mission is to be the leading company, like non-gaming VR content company that excels at storytelling. And so what they have is a bunch of VR educational experiences that are highly narrated. So you can be doing something like exploring the bottom of the ocean, and there's a narrator explaining to you different things as you go around and navigate this virtual space. Another use case that I think is going to really be exciting in education is the thought of simulating different types of experiences or experiments in the classroom. So these technologies allow us to interact with a virtual environment and kind of manipulate objects in it. And so this kind of goes back to that constructivist mindset that I said earlier. Students learn best by building and sharing and reflecting on things that they built. And so these types of use cases are also viable for mixed reality. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of like chemistry experiments and things done through mixed reality, especially as these devices come on the market. And the company that's most exciting when I think about these technologies is Curoscope. Has anyone seen what they're doing? So Curoscope has this T-shirt and a kind of augmented reality application that will allow you to kind of see the insides of a person. And they're trying to build this up to the point where that as like a person kind of moves around or is exercising and stuff like that, you could actually see what's happening inside that person, like their anatomy. So a really cool application. One other application I kind of want to highlight, this has been around in the edge space for a while, but a company called zSpace. So zSpace is taking a different approach than most of the other companies we talked about. They have a completely vertically integrated solution where they have the hardware and the software that they're selling to schools and to other institutions. And so we see a lot of hardware companies out there, and we're seeing a lot of content companies out there. And I think there's not a lot of people really trying to go the Apple approach of doing both. But zSpace has been around for a while, and one of the benefits to their product is that multiple students can be wearing these augmented reality glasses and working in the same environment at the same time. The downside to their application, though, is that these devices cost $4,000 a piece, so they've gotten like very, very little market traction in education. They came from the government sector and have tried to move into education and have just found it cost prohibitive. But they have been around as a mixed virtual reality solution in the education space for about 5 or 10 years already. So it's one that I wanted to call out. And then next use case I wanted to call out is this notion of distance learning. And I think this is incredibly exciting. So providing an environment where students and teachers could engage with each other intimately from anywhere in the world or in any setting. So right now we're kind of limited in many ways to proximity. There's while I could use a MOOC, a massive online course, to try and learn something, what we're finding is that most MOOCs have less than 2% completion rate on any course that is completed. One, people are always just signing up for these courses, but two, there's something in a classroom environment that happens when you're face-to-face with someone, a level of intimacy that can't be replicated through like traditional online MOOCs and that type of education. But I think virtual reality can replicate that intimate experience that happens between a student and a teacher because it can make the experience so real and put us together. And so there's a number of benefits that come to that. One, a professor from Harvard could be teaching to students anywhere in the world, and that class is not limited by the number of seats that we can fill at that time. But two, not only could that connection happen between student and teacher, but it can happen anywhere in the world. And so I love this application by a company called Lecture VR, and this is called their Engage application. But what it is a series of virtual lecture halls that they've created where students and teachers can meet So let's say you're learning about Apollo 13. That class can actually take place inside the spaceship, and students and teachers from all over the world can meet and discuss what happened on the Apollo spacecraft and do so from inside the craft. So really exciting, this company. And then the final use case that I wanted to bring up, and the one that resonates with me the most, is social and emotional development. So specifically using these immersive media to improve the cognitive ability and to build social skills for people. And I think that all of these technologies can play into this use case. And so one application that I want to highlight is called A Walk Through Dementia, and this was built by a company in India. And what their goal was to allow us to experience what it feels like to have dementia, so that we could better understand our loved ones that were suffering from that illness. And so that's one example, not of helping someone with a social and emotional issue, but helping us empathize with someone that has a health ailment. And I think on the other side, again, what I'm really excited about is the application of these technologies as it goes to people with learning disabilities. And so there's a startup in Boston that I'm excited about called Brain Power, and they're looking to build mixed and augmented reality applications for people with autism to help them understand like social cues and like the emotions of other people. So if I look out in the audience and I see kind of like boredom in someone's face, like helping you like understand that and recognize that as an emotion. I think there's an extraordinary amount of things that can be done with regard to learning disabilities and autism. And as Sean had kind of pre-sold a little bit, I'm specifically interested in how VR could be used for people with high-functioning autism to build vocational skills that could be used to get jobs in the real world. And so that's really important to me. And so the final thing I wanted to call out in the social emotional space is Pokemon Go. So a couple months ago, when I was giving this presentation, Pokemon was really taking off. And in the education space, there was a lot of excitement around the fact that we're getting kids off the couch, we're getting them to collaborate and go out and investigate landmarks and learn navigation skills. But within the autism community, there was a surprising amount of students or children that were having difficulty making social interactions, that found that through Pokemon they were able to connect with people in a way that they weren't previously able to do so. So I'm not sure if anyone here has seen the documentary Life Animated. It's a story, a real story about a father who was having a difficult time connecting with his child, and noticed that that child was spending an exorbitant amount of time watching Disney films, and instead of trying to talk to him in our kind of like real world cues and in social context, started to talk to him as if he were a Disney character, and found that that child was able to felt more comfortable acting as if he was a Disney character than trying to participate in the real world that we live in. And so that created the connection between the father and the student and child that then allowed them to kind of build and evolve. And now the child has gone on to become like a public speaker. And I think that, when I think about Pokemon Go, that same phenomena is possible. People are going to be using these technologies, and this is in these games, and it's a way to communicate and to collaborate in a way that is a new moment for people. And I think that creates a bit of a safe environment for people that have learning disabilities or other social and emotional development challenges, because it's kind of like a resetting of what the social cues are, and I'm pretty excited about that. So those were the use cases I want to share. I've got a few more slides on what the challenges are to kind of classroom adoption for these technologies. And so first, going back to this research by Engage, what are some of the drawbacks that people are seeing about VR in education? According to them, 47% of educators are just concerned with the lack of enough VR content out there right now. So while people are kind of like experimenting with it, bringing it into the classroom in a way that's like truly viable and that you can use to drive like the rigorous outcomes that you're looking for, educators aren't seeing VR there at the moment. There's also this notion that virtual reality is expensive or difficult to implement. I'm sure people here probably have like mixed feelings on that. Low-cost virtual reality can be achieved through Google Cardboard and a mobile device. While some of these more like high-end or high-fidelity devices such as the HTC or the Oculus are certainly cost-prohibitive right now for schools, as Google Classroom has kind of proved through the low-cost mobile VR and cardboard combination, these technologies are going to start to penetrate the classroom. Lastly, like it being kind of like too hard to manage during a class. This is always going to be a problem in the education space. 40% of teachers turn over every 2 or 3 years. 40% of new teachers are out of the business. So there's this constant recycling of teachers and educators in school districts. And so the problem that creates for educational leaders is that you're constantly needing to train people on a breadth of applications. And so educators are a bit reluctant to try new technologies sometime because their needs are a lot more primitive. They're trying to get teachers up to speed and trying to create like consistency year in, year out when they're having high amounts of turnover. The inhibitors that I see in the classroom, beyond just what teachers were identifying as inhibitors on that last slide, these are the things in terms of penetrating like the K-12 education space that I think that these technologies are going to struggle with. The first, education is just like a really, really complex sale to make. A lot of education spending is coming from federal funds, so specifically there's large amounts of funding for struggling school districts, for students that need intervention. And if you're going to go after these funds, and this is how schools buy these things, you need a large breadth of content, and you need to prove that it has efficacy and that content is rigorous. So going back to that problem on the last slide, there not being enough content out there, it's not that there's not just enough content to meet all the different things that we want to teach. Educators buy bundles of content. They don't buy content a la carte. Spending in the education space, for the most part, does not happen in the classroom. It happens at the building level, and there's multiple stakeholders involved in that procurement process as well. So the good news is, once you get to that point where you have a pretty good amount of breadth, if you have a chemistry solution that can span a couple different grade levels and can meet a lot of the Common Core standards, you actually have a competitive advantage against a lot of startups because they don't have the content breadth or the proven efficacy to compete with you. But there's a high bar to get into the education space because you need a lot of content and you need credibility. And you need relationships. I forget who I was talking to earlier. We were talking about unseating HMH and all of the other kind of incumbents in the education space. And part of what makes them so difficult to unseat is that they've been in this space for so long that they have embedded relationships, and especially at the lobbying level. Go ahead.
Yeah, how do they typically test for efficacy? Do these companies ever get the opportunity to offer their services for free to schools, just as like to develop like a case study, or I'm just curious?
Yeah, so a company like Compass Learning will pay to have an efficacy study done, and what we'll do is we'll have a control group of students that aren't using our product and then a group that are, and everyone is, I guess what's the word I'm looking for, cherry picking data to tell a really good efficacy story in the education space. But if you really look at like the actual benefits and learning that a lot of these products are doing, they fall far short of the story that they're telling. But if you're going to go after federal dollars, you better at least have a story for efficacy. And the easiest way to get there is to hire some sort of a third-party psychometric company that can come in and do some sort of comparative analysis for you, and they'll typically work with you to get to the story that you're trying to tell. But that's another barrier for getting into the education space because that's cost, right? And that's time. There are also a bunch of third parties out there that the consortiums that will go and find new education products and bring them to the classroom and kind of like facilitate that for you. But then again, they're putting you up against competitors, and so you don't control the outcome quite as well as when you hire your own market research company to do that study for you. The second point on here, device access and equality. So I shared on the slide before, there's this there's this belief that virtual reality is expensive, and the truth is that it really doesn't have to be. We're all moving on to one of the next generations of our smartphones, and we're going to be recycling our iPhone 5 to get the iPhone 7, and the generations of phones that we are about to start abandoning are going to be good enough to power some of these low-cost VR experiences, specifically the virtual field trips in Google Classrooms. So we're seeing across the US right now some school districts that are collecting people's old smartphones and then bringing them into the classroom in a way so that they have this, this kind of bundle of different types of smartphones that they can use for VR. Now that creates a whole nother set of challenges because someone in the at the school district needs to manage 30 or 40 different Android type devices and iPhones, but the net is that there's a cheap way to get virtual reality in the classroom because there's a surplus of smartphones available, and through Google Cardboard it's pretty cheap in order to build what you need to get started. But that brings up the kind of last point here, though, device durability and cleanliness. And so anyone who's used Google Cardboard for a while knows that that they can get pretty beat up, especially if you're carrying it around to different places. And on top of that, if you're using a Google Cardboard type device and giving it across multiple students, there's a big problem with just like cleanliness in general. And so there's a company in San Antonio right now, Merge VR, which has built like a foam VR headset that has a higher price point. I think they're around like $60 or $70, but they're trying to speak to this need right here that they have devices that can be thrown on the ground, that have more rigor, and that are a lot easier to clean and have better hygiene associated with them. And finally, I just want to go back to this point about equality. Equality, I think, is going to be a really interesting point in VR. On one hand, you're going to start seeing progressive and well-funded school districts that are going to have devices like the HTC and the Oculus. So in some ways, virtual reality could create a larger divide in terms of access. Some students are going to be able to have these high-fidelity experiences, and other students won't. But on the opposite side, if we go back and think about virtual field trips and some of the use cases, virtual reality can actually close the equality gap, because the VR field trip that one school is able to go to, going to visit the pyramids, for example, any other school could go to through that Google Classroom experience. And so it's no longer well-funded school districts that are able to kind of take students off and do these kind of like local historical things that maybe some of the underprivileged school districts aren't able to do. VR can really allow everyone to equally experience things like being in Apollo 13 and stuff like that. So I think equality is going to kind of play out in education as a pro and as a con. Questions on some of the inhibitors into the classroom? Yeah.
Can we have questions be asked
Yeah.
on the microphone so our live streamers can hear? Just push the button for the screen and then here we go. Hold it down. All right, sweet.
This is more back to a couple slides ago. I just didn't ask it, but I'm not. Is there any companies focusing just on college and bringing virtual reality into college environments? Because I'm noticing a lot of K through 12, but haven't really come across many colleges.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't noticed anyone specifically focused on college. I mean, I'll admit I'm a bit biased in preparing this deck because it was prepared for the K-12 audience, and that's also the market that I play in. But I know that the higher education institutions do make more a la carte purchases. And so going back to one of these inhibitors here, the complex sales process, federal or public schools for K-12 are more reliant on federal and state funding and the requirements associated with it, whereas I guess higher ed institutions are really trying to figure out what's best for that classroom and provide more autonomy to the teachers and the professors that are teaching that subject. So I bet from that perspective, we'll actually see a little bit more traction of VR and AR for kind of one-off use cases. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so I just have one kind of parting thought here, going back to what I shared to the educators. Virtual reality, or Pokemon Go and these technologies in general aren't just a fad, they are a beginning. As we shared before, education is moving to this place where we are preparing students for jobs that don't exist today, and that requires a level of critical thinking skill and that just isn't possible through traditional textbook education. We covered a pretty wide range of use cases for VR and AR. And so I'm just really excited to see all the different ways that entrepreneurs and developers such as yourselves are going to start to bring VR education into VR into the education space. In my opinion, it's an inevitability that these technologies are going to penetrate. It's just a matter of getting to the point where we can navigate the sales process and we can get devices into the hands of educators. Yeah.
Do you have a sense for how much money is spent on technology by schools versus like after school supplemental programs, privately run things, Kumon and things like that?
Yeah.
And if those things are a viable market for this, or if it's really the school system?
Yeah, I guess there's, breaking that down, there's public schools that might have an after-school program, and then there might be like a private school market. So in charter schools, I guess I would break it down that way. Public schools, they don't typically have as much dedicated funding specifically to their after-school programs. They're going after federal dollars that are for struggling students, and the way that technology gets deployed, whether it's during the school period or afterwards, isn't quite a factor. Charter schools, though, have a lot more autonomy of where they're spending their money. And so I think some of the more exciting things that I'm seeing in VR applications right now are happening in charter schools, people that are really developing a digital-first curriculum for students. They're like going as far as there's schools that are teaching virtual reality development to students and kind of building their own applications in some of these more advanced charter schools that we're seeing. So I don't have any of the specific dollars. I'd be happy to follow up with you on that because I have plenty of market research that could tell us that. But yeah, a lot of companies in the education space have been chasing these big federal dollars for a long period of time. And so about a year ago, there was the Every Child Succeeds Act that replaced the No Child Left Behind Act. And what that's starting to do is break up some of these large federal budgets and give schools, districts, and states more autonomy of where they can spend that money. So I think we're going to start seeing it loosen up a bit, where teachers can kind of say, "Hey, I really want to try this," but at this moment, teachers just don't really have a budget to try a lot of things unless they're using their own money, and that does happen a lot. Like if you go to a ed tech innovation conference, it's a lot of people that are sourcing mobile devices from parents and trying to bring VR in, with their own dollars.
So Colin, as technologists, we tend to be optimists about this kind of thing. Have we started to see any significant results from the efficacy studies, and are those justifying our optimism in this case, if so?
I actually have not seen any efficacy research yet in VR and AR. There's a professor at Harvard that John Richards, who is creating the first conference on virtual reality efficacy, that's going to be in January of this year. So he's bringing together a lot of like the lead researchers in virtual reality together to actually address this topic itself. But I would expect to see that company Nearpod possibly very soon starting to do some sort of efficacy research, because in the digital supplemental space that they play in, you have to have that as table stakes in order to go after these larger dollars. But I agree. I mean, there is a lot of optimism, and I think that's why I started with that Goldman Sachs report, just to kind of share that there are like real financial expectations for where this market is going to go. And I've always appreciated the Bill Gates quote that we over-anticipate technology adoption on a 1-year period, but we under-anticipate it on a 3-year period. And I kind of expect the same thing to happen with virtual reality, that where we are a year from now might not be what we hope it to be, but if we fast forward 3 years from now, we're going to really start to see a lot of these devices in the classroom. And so I think now is the time to really be thinking about education in virtual reality.
You go into that conference in January?
I am, yeah. What other questions?
Hey, just a little curious. You mentioned you were working on a venture yourself. Could you talk a little bit about that, or do we have to sign NDAs?
No. Thank you. So I have not really done much with it since building this presentation. My company, Compass Learning, got acquired a month and a half ago. So my kind of work focus shifted for the last month and a half, leading up to this moment today. But I'm excited about kind of sharing all this information with you all, because it's kind of like getting me back into the pursuit of the kind of VR application that I wanted to build around autism and learning disabilities. So if anyone is interested in that case that I shared, vocational training for adults with high functioning autism, I am looking for people to start thinking about a proof of concept.
Well,
Right.
thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, so usually we have a Q&A, which we've accomplished very nicely, and then just a little bit of time for folks who are looking for work or folks who have work to offer to tell the group about what you've got going on. So if anybody has anything, if you're trying to find a job or if you're looking for a job in VR, sing out. All right.
My name is Zach Wallig. I'm a 3D artist.
Hi, my name is Zach Wallig. I'm a 3D artist, texture modeling. I've worked in the games industry for about 12 years now, so you need an artist, I'm available for work.
Cool. That one over here, Chris.
Hey, so the Wave VR just posted a position for a 3D artist. So if you're interested in that, they're around town, and that just happened today. So we heard that and just trying to pass that around as much as possible.
This isn't as much as work. My name is Ethan Black. I'm a student at UT, and I'm writing my undergraduate thesis on applications of VR in education. So if anyone feels like they have studies or things that might be useful, I'd love to grab your information.
All right, well, that looks like it's it for this evening. Thank you all for coming out. We have more pizza. Kevin's over here demoing his system, and we'll be happy to tell you more about the goings-on in Houston. The conference there sounds fascinating, and I'm going to see if I can make a field trip for that, hopefully a real one rather than a virtual one. Really appreciate y'all coming out this evening. Feel free to meet up with me or with Trisha afterwards and finish off the pizza so I don't have to. Thanks for coming.